They didn't even ask for this.
Well, this is my very first podcast, and I think it has to be said that the purpose of this cast, which I'm calling the Golden Oldies, a round table for the generations of the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, folks who were born during that period, is that I think that we all need to discuss our problems with each other and just have a general heart-to-heart conversation about what we've experienced and what we're doing. So since I'm going to be doing most of the talking on the initial podcasts or casts, I think I should tell you a little bit about myself. First of all, I'm 78 years old, and I was born during World War II in April of 1943. I was born in Manhattan and lived in the vicinity of Amsterdam Avenue and 71st Street near what is now Lincoln Center and Fordham Law School. Of course, neither of those institutions were there when I was born in 1943. I'm Jewish, but I am certainly not Orthodox. I wouldn't call myself even Reform, but I am dedicated to Israel because my son-in-law was born in Israel and has dual citizenship and lives with my daughter out in California. So anyway, I've been married more than 50 years to a wonderful wife. Her name is Wendy, and Wendy and I have 2 children and 4 grandchildren. Now, about 3 years after I was born, we moved down to Miami, Florida. In fact, Miami Beach, Florida. And at that time, my father was trying to set up a business as the owner of a gas station, but he failed to do that over a fairly long period of time, from 1947 to about 1951. So around 1951, we came back to the New York metropolitan area. My sister had been born in 1946. I don't have a good relationship with her. I'm not going to talk about her very much. But in any event, the family, my mother, my father, myself, and my sister came back from Miami Beach, Florida, to live in Hempstead, New York, where my father worked selling furniture. He was a salesman, and I would say that as a salesman, the Death of a Salesman play is an epitome of his life, and in fact, he ended up committing suicide in 1993 after being divorced from my mother and while married to his 3rd wife. We won't go into that a great deal. In any event, I lived in Hempstead and West Hempstead, Long Island for about 4 or 5 years, and in 1956, just before my parents were divorced, we moved back to Miami Beach, Florida, and then over to Coral Gables, Florida, where I went to high school and delivered papers on my motor scooter, worked as a fountain man at Jan's Ice Cream Parlor on Miracle Mile, and because of lack of funds, when I graduated high school, I ended up going to the University of Florida, which was just about the only school I applied to, because that was the only school I could afford. That was in Gainesville, Florida. I was there until about the summer of 1964. I worked as a radio announcer on the FM classical station for the university. I have somewhat of an ability in foreign languages, so I could announce the music, whether it be Mozart or Beethoven or French composers and American composers. And when I graduated from the University of Florida in August of 1964, I ended up working as a radio announcer in Christiansted, St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands for about a little less than a year. At that time, I was drafted, and I volunteered for the draft actually because my local draft board said that if I didn't return back to school, I would be drafted anyway. So I went into the Army. Now this was during the Vietnam era, and I was very fortunate. After basic training and after advanced infantry training and advanced training as a radio teletype operator, I ended up with the 34th Signal Battalion in Stuttgart, Germany, and was there until April of 1967, when I applied for and received what was called a European out discharge in Europe. I went to Paris and traveled around. I studied a little French and so on and so forth. Came back to the United States and worked in Washington, D.C. For WMAL-TV. And then I came up to New York, and eventually I went to law school. I became an assistant district attorney in Bronx County and then practiced law for 20 years, worked for the courts in New York for a while, and then became a United States administrative law judge. So that's my basic background. I am very dedicated to my family, dedicated to my children and grandchildren. My son lives in Long Island, and my daughter and her two children, my son and his two children, live in Long Island. He's married to a wonderful young lady and named Amy, and my daughter is married to a gentleman who was born in Israel, and his name is Gadi, G-A-D-I, which means lucky in Hebrew. And I have two grandchildren out in San Diego, California. So that's essentially what my background is. Now, this podcast is not about politics, but I know you're all curious. No, I am not a Republican. I did not vote Republican in either the 2016 or the 2020 election. And my favorite president happens to be Harry S. Truman. So I sort of classify myself as a rather conservative Democrat, maybe near Republican, but I'm not going to be delving into those issues in any of these podcasts. I just want to be upfront and frank with you about what my background is. I did graduate from law school at Brooklyn Law School in 1972, and previous to that, I graduated from the University of Florida with a bachelor's degree in American or European history, I don't even remember what, in the summer, as I mentioned, of 1964. So that's essentially my background. What I want to talk to you about today in terms of a roundtable discussion for folks who were born during the 30s, 40s, and 50s. I'm calling us the golden oldies because I still think a lot of us have a great deal to offer to both our generation and the younger generations and the society as a whole. What I'm going to talk about is will be two incidents in life that I think may have relevance and may be of help. One is what happened to my wife and myself when my daughter married Gadi, as I mentioned, from Israel, and eventually they moved to California. And we'll talk a little bit about that and the trauma that Wendy and I went through when they moved out to California, and how we adjusted. I should, if I didn't mention to you that we live and have lived in the same building in downtown Brooklyn, New York, since 1973. So I suppose that's a very important point. So the other incident I'd like to talk to you about, or with you about, and invite you to discuss, is a health issue that occurred to me. I underwent a triple bypass around 2012 to 2015, and in 2017 I ended up with an artificial aortic heart valve, which was placed into my heart through a vein at Lenox Hill Hospital by a wonderful doctor by the name of Chad Klieger. So what I went through in that surgery, I think is something that maybe will be of help to other people to understand, and we can talk about it later, or it can be the subject of whatever you think might be purposeful. So anyway, what happened in the first event was that in 2005, my daughter was married to this young man, a wonderful young man from Israel, who we get along with, and we just deeply love him. He's a wonderful fellow. And they moved out to San Diego, California. Well, when they proposed to make that move from New York, and they were living in Lower Manhattan at the time, Wendy, my wife, and I were very upset. We were thinking, oh, you know, we'll never see them again. It's a terrible thing. When can we get out to California? It's such a difficult place to reach. We can't drive there. It's too expensive to fly there. At that time, people really weren't doing FaceTime that much. So, you know, how are we going to communicate with them? And what's going to be happening? Also, they're going to be cut off. They would be cut off. We were concerned that they would be cut off from my son and his wife. They were living in Manhattan and then moved to Long Island, and they're still there, and their two children, my grandchildren. So the whole trauma of it was, you know, in the announcement and in the beginning. And we were concerned. We told them it was against our advice. We didn't want them to do it. We didn't know a damn thing about San Diego, California, which it turns out is a lovely place, but we were just very upset about it. And I don't know, we did everything we could, verbally at least, to deter them from making the move. But they were adamant, and they made the move. So they went out as a couple with no children to San Diego, and eventually my daughter became pregnant with her first child, a daughter, and of course we were there at the time she gave birth, and we were there just before she gave birth, and we toured around San Diego. They were living at the time in the Kensington area, and we went there. We went out to Palm Desert, over the mountains. We went up to Los Angeles, past the Marine Corps camp at Camp Pendleton, and we just saw the whole place. The weather was fabulous. The place was not very crowded. The roads were very nice. The food was at least as good as most of the food we had in Brooklyn at the time. And the atmosphere, the people we were introduced to, really changed our view. I think my son-in-law made the move in part because the climate there was most like the climate in the town that he came from in Israel, which is over on the Mediterranean coast between Haifa and Tel Aviv. So eventually, we made peace with this, and another grandchild was born, and we kept visiting San Diego. Eventually, I became a member of the library there. They bought a house, we helped them, and it just has worked into a wonderful place for them to live, and we plan to spend some time there, as much time as we can, and remain here in New York, in Brooklyn, at the same time, to be in touch with my son, my daughter-in-law, and my two grandchildren out in Long Island. So the whole thing worked out to be, over the course of from 2005 to the present 2022, we're talking 2015, about 15 years or more. It's turned out to be a wonderful thing and really broadened our horizon. So what I want to say to you is that I really learned, and I think Wendy would agree, my wife, that we learned a good lesson that, sometimes the younger generation in living their own lives has something to teach us, and we have to, be considerate of them and try and work with whatever they feel is required for them to live their own lives. I love my children very much, but I think it's very important to, not to try and interfere in their lives beyond just providing love, care, attention, and support with whatever it is they want to do. Of course, there are limits. I mean, if they want to do something totally destructive, use drugs, rob a bank, or whatever, I mean, I would do all I could to prevent it. But for what happened to Wendy and me with my daughter and son-in-law, it all worked out to be a very wonderful thing. So I'm sure many, many of you have experienced a similar thing, and maybe some of it has turned problematical. It didn't work out as well as it did for me and my wife, and for Jessica and Gotti. But, I'd love to hear from you to tell me what information and thoughts you might have about this issue of children moving away, of older children moving away and adapting or adopting a totally different lifestyle from the one that you raised them with. I found it hard and difficult to take. There are many ways that could happen. It could happen through philosophy, through religion, through even politics, although I don't want to get into politics, but or because of a financial reversal, or a financial improvement way beyond the level of where you or I might be at this day. So that's subject one, and I think I've made myself, said what I had to say, and would love to hear from you on that. So on the other subject, which is, illness, I'll tell you a little bit about what happened. I've always been, as you can see, a little bit on the heavy side, and had a habit of loving to eat more than I should. I always ran, maybe up to 30 pounds overweight throughout most of my life. Not in my teenage years or when I was in the Army, but later on, and mostly through my marriage. So what happened to me was, I think it was in 2000, trying to remember, I believe it was 2015, I was at work. At that time I was working as a United States Administrative Law Judge for the Social Security Administration in Lower Manhattan, and I wasn't feeling too well one day. I had been treated over the course of years for high blood pressure, but it always seemed to be under control. And then one afternoon, I just had to leave work. I felt very, very distressed and ill, dizzy, flushed. I felt I was running a temperature, and I went up to my wonderful personal care physician uptown and spoke to him. He tested my blood pressure, and I was like off the charts. I mean, I don't remember, 200 or something over 150. It was, really in a dangerous area. So he said to me, well, you're going to the hospital. And I said, well, I'll go downstairs and get a cab. And he said, no. He said, you're not going in a cab. I'm calling an ambulance. I can't allow you to take a cab at all. So they put me in an ambulance, and I went up to a local hospital on the east side called Lenox Hill Hospital. And at the hospital, I was in the emergency room, I think 4, 5, 6 hours, I don't remember how long. I had calmed down quite a bit, my blood pressure went down, and what happened was they decided to do what's called an angiogram, which is a nuclear test of all the blood vessels and arteries and veins related to the heart. So they did the angiogram, and the result of it was, and they showed me on a screen with the blood moving, and you could see all the veins, that I had 2 or 3 major blockages, and one was very close to the aortic heart valve, and the wonderful surgeon I had there said, you're going to have bypass surgery. We can't deal with this through medicine, and I can't deal with it in any fashion other than opening up your chest and removing the blockages, putting in stents, and having medication. And this was really a terrible shock to me, but what are you going to do? I felt that I had to go through with it. So as the doctor was also reviewing the angiogram, he said to me that I had a calcification around the aortic heart valve, which was going to require some other intervention, surgery, a heart valve. He wasn't really sure, but he said at that moment he was just going to deal with the arterial and the blockages around the heart, especially in what's called the lower descending artery, I think it's called the left anterior descending artery, which is colloquially called by the doctors the widowmaker. In any event, I went through the surgery. It was just hell afterwards. I had to recover for about 2 weeks. I was in pain. You couldn't get up to urinate. I couldn't move in the bed. It was just a very, very difficult thing. But eventually I went home. I recovered. I went back to work in about a month. And then in August of 2015, I had this wonderful operation, which was really almost a minor surgery because the artificial heart valve was placed into my heart by way of a vein. A very miraculous thing. The doctor told me it had only been approved for people my age recently by the Food and Drug Administration, and that I was very lucky to have it. So since then I've been trying to watch my weight, exercise, and it's always a big effort for me, but that's where I am. What I found in terms of watching my weight is that, and this is a little suggestion, you can comment on it. I found that eating less at dinner, in other words, in the evening, rather than having a full meal, just having a very minimal meal or a snack type meal of the type of food that the doctor recommended, you know, which was fish, no cheese, no sauces, very little alcohol, maybe 1 drink a week, and very little sugar, very little salt, you know, so on and so forth. I was able to kind of mend myself. I would eat plain oatmeal for breakfast, a cup of coffee or 2 was allowed, and I still have a cup or 2 a day, but I keep my alcohol down to about 1 drink a week. And what I found is that by that little strange trick of just eating the most minimal amount to try and satisfy myself at night, as opposed to loading up and making dinner the major meal, really has helped me. And the other aspect is, of course, you have to eat food that is plain, vegetables, not a lot of sauce, no salt, no cheese, etc. And exercise is just about something that you have to do every day. And the cardiologist, the follow-up cardiologist, also at Lenox Hill, who's been following me for several years, has just pressed me to do more and more physical exercise, to the point that she would like me to vigorously jog and lift weights and run for an hour every single day. So I've been trying to do it. I don't do it all the time, but it has helped me. And the last time we were out in California, which was just a couple of weeks ago, it's now, January 18th today, 2022. We were out there for my granddaughter's bat mitzvah. And a few people said I was getting younger, not older, or whatever they meant. You know, it meant, I guess, that I looked pretty well. So those are, you know, my suggestions and what I went through. One other little funny hint is that just before I first went to the doctor with that very high abnormal blood pressure, I had had a nosebleed, and I was at work and it bled onto my white shirt. Someone had told me, I don't know, somewhere along the line, that using Windex and water would take the blood out. And amazingly, every time I cut my hand or cut my finger or have a nosebleed, which I still get once in a while, and it drips onto the sheets or my nose or whatever it might be from my nose, I use Windex, and it's absolutely the real brand Windex, and it's absolutely amazing because it takes the blood right out. So that's what I have to say about that. I'm still driving. I drive carefully. I'm not the driver I used to be. I used to ride motorcycles. I gave that up. And I'm just trying to live a careful life, keep myself around for as long as I can, and do things like making this broadcast. Maybe I'll be of help to somebody else. Anyway, that's it for right now, and I hope to be in touch later. Bye-bye.